There's a new study about retirement out, and it has people standing with their mouth open because they are completely freaked out. So before I get into the study, I want to just preface with traditionally, in my experience, there's two camps of people. There's the camp of people who have been really paying attention to saving and preparing for retirement. And then there's the other camp of people who are free spirits. And they may even be of retirement age and they haven't actually prepared too much. But the one thing that they all have in common is that everyone feels like they don't have enough. And for the most part, they're right. And that's why people are freaking out. My name is Michelle Pava, and you are listening to the Finance Therapist Podcast, and we're going to dive right in. So let's talk about retirement first. It is a concept that is deeply ingrained in the American psyche. From a young age, we are taught to work hard, save diligently, and eventually enjoy the fruits of our labor in our golden years. But as inflation continues to rise, so do our expectations for retirement savings. In addition to that, there's different bills and policies which make it hard for us to even have access to healthy food or medical care, and there's just a lot going on that wasn't going on 50 years ago. So according to a recent study by Northwestern Mutual, the target for a comfortable retirement has soared to a record of $1.46 million. That is a 53% increase since 2020. And you might be thinking, hey, if the target for retirement keeps rising, shouldn't we be saving more? Well, you'd think so, but the reality paints a very different picture. Despite the growing target, the average amount saved for retirement has actually dropped. And that is a concerning trend that is widening the gap between what people think they need for retirement and what is actually saved. Of course, you can see how this can be, in the future, an increase of poverty across the United States. All right, so let's break down some numbers. And I want you to understand that if you are in the 1% or in the top 5%, you probably are also wanting to save in a certain way that you can continue your lifestyle. So this is just as impactful for you as it is for someone who is hoping just to float by. So breaking down the numbers, every single generation from Gen Z to the boomers show a significant gap between what they think they need and what they actually need, and really what they're going to be bare bottom comfortable with. So for example, Gen Z expects that they need 1.63 million, but guess how much they've saved on average in this study? They've only saved $22,000. Well, maybe let's make it 23,000. It's like 22,800. So $23,000 on average. That is a staggering 1.61 million gap. Okay? And this isn't just about numbers. This is about the emotional toll this disparity takes. So you can imagine the stress and anxiety of realizing you are nowhere near your retirement goals. And unfortunately, this is a feeling that most Americans can resonate with. So where are we falling short? So part of the problem, obviously, is a lack of planning around taxes. Only 30% of Americans have a plan to minimize their taxes that they pay on the retirement savings, according to the study. And this is true. A lot of times when I speak to my clients and I bring up taxes, they sort of look at me like deer in the headlights because it's not something that they have factored in. They're only thinking about how much they're saving. They're not really looking at how much it's going to cost when they take that money out or just taxes in general. And a lot of people have been taught that a 401k is where it's at. And honestly, it's usually not. And putting money into a 401k may just not be enough to retire, especially retire comfortably if your financial plan doesn't address the impact of taxes on retirement income. Most people don't even realize that their retirement income will likely be taxed at between 20 and 30%. when they withdraw and spend it. So by the time they recognize the impact, it's often too late to adjust it. But is it really too late? No. So what can we do to minimize taxes and maximize our retirement savings? So let's explore some different strategies, some different ideas. Talk to your financial advisor about this, just throwing out some ideas. One idea is to look at withdrawing money from both traditional and Roth accounts to remain in a lower tax bracket. So this is a strategic move. And remember, money from traditional accounts is taxed as income, while something like a Roth is tax-free traditionally. Another idea is when you are going to be making charitable donations, do this strategically. Do this from taxable accounts. So not only does this allow you to support a cause that you care about, but it's also tax deductible. So here's another one, and this one is strategic, but it's also more popular, more common, and that is the HSA, which is a health savings account. So this is a tax-advantaged healthcare account, and it's usually for, obviously, medical expenses. So when you withdraw this for a qualified expense, it will be tax-free, which is providing yet another way to stretch your retirement dollars because you're using something tax-free. It's so important to remember that retirement isn't just about a financial milestone. It's an emotional one too. The stress and anxiety of not having or not having enough saved can take a toll on your mental health, your mental well-being. So by taking proactive steps to save and to plan and to minimize taxes, you can take more control of your financial future and retire with more confidence. Now, almost everyone thinks that there's some magic number that they need to retire comfortably, and that number has exploded no matter where someone is in the spectrum of this since 2020. So let's look at Gen Z. Gen Z thinks that they are going to need $1.63 million for retirement. They've only saved about $23,000, and that means they have an almost $2 million or $1.5 million gap. So now we're going to dive into the different age generations. And so with that, it's kind of interesting because they are all battling different challenges and have different predictions of what they feel that they need and actually what they will need. So Gen Z, now this is a young group. This is between ages 11 and 26. So they feel, and this is obviously going more towards the early 20s, they feel more that they are going to need about 1.63 million for retirement, but they've only saved about 22,000. So their anxiety is through the roof because they tend to feel like not only do they have time, but they also feel like they're not getting ahead right now. Why is that? Because they're right in the brunt of the inflation. They pretty much, the adult end of that generation has really only known war, pandemic. I mean, it's not good. So this generation feels like they're behind schedule because their parents and grandparents, usually by their age in the mid-20s, have already had homes and vehicles paid for and starting out their lives, where it's harder for Gen Z because Gen Z is battling so much. And so not only are they battling the day-to-day, but they are also kind of freaking out over retirement because they feel like if I can't even get a house now, how am I going to get equity in it? And these are those who are saving and more financial planning in their retirement and in their day-to-day. And then we have millennials. So millennials now are like age 26, 27 to about mid-30s, and they feel like that they need 1.65 million, but they only have about 62,000 saved. They're also in a space where they are trying to get ahead. They're trying to build equity, trying to buy a house. Things have been very expensive for them as well. And they also have a lot of, and I should also mention for Gen Z as well, there's a lot of other costs involved. You know, their college, university loans are through the roof. So if you didn't fit into a certain dynamic for some of the bills from the government, or policies and benefits from the government, you're probably still paying on your college loans. And so you've got those bills hanging as well. Then we have Gen X, and that is more where they are forecasting that they need 1.56 million to retire, and they've saved about 100,000, a little over 100,000. So that is a gap of about $1.5 million. That's a pretty big gap, because now Gen X is moving up there in age. So they're getting closer to retirement, and they're nowhere near what they thought they needed. So that's not good. And then we have boomers. Many boomers are already retired or heading, not even heading, skidding towards retirement. They think that they need about just under 1,990,000, and most of them have only saved about 120,000. That's about what they have. So that is almost a $900,000 gap in what they need. So as you can see, it's not easy for them. So let's look at when people started saving. So Gen Z on average started saving for retirement at age 22. Most of them have started saving because they had a job out of college and they had a 401k. So they are, on a whole though, saving about a decade earlier than most of their counterparts in other generations. So that's good. And on average, most people do expect to retire at about age 65. Gen Z wants to live financially free much earlier than that. I should mention that Gen Z and millennials tend to focus on living simply, living a minimalist lifestyle. And a lot of that age group are also focused on making homemade meals and coupon cutting and learning how to budget and focusing on budgeting as almost a hobby. So it's very different than the boomers and Gen X, Gen X, because Gen X would be more about their lifestyle and what they grew up with, which is in my age group, was more affluence and things weren't as expensive. And budgeting was not a hobby for most of us. In fact, being more luxury focused was more our hobby, having name brands and having the flashy cars and the McMansions and all of that. So we had a different upbringing because it was just different for us. And it was I do feel in a lot of ways it was easier for us. So there is an optimism that everyone has that they're going to have a long life. And there's also a fear that Social Security could run out. And also we have this pushing of expectations for what retirement should look like and also what retirement really is. And going back to inflation, it's a term that we hear a lot about and we think about it in the day-to-day, but we don't think about it for the future. And so inflation, it's a term we're hearing over and over these days because it's affecting us, not just because of the price of groceries or gas, but it's also creeping into our retirement dreams. So we know that there's that 53% surge of what we feel like we need to retire comfortably since 2020. And despite this growing target, people really aren't saving more. And for the most part, it's because they can't, because of inflation. So the average amount saved for retirement has actually dropped. So what do you think? Do you feel like you're on the right path for retirement? Has inflation affected you? Do you plan, or are you sort of that free spirit that is going, oh my gosh, I need to focus on retirement? And for the most part, you're one of those because you wouldn't have stuck around this long in the podcast if you're that much of a free spirit that you don't care. So you do care about it. And where do you stand with it? And how are you navigating this? How are you navigating inflation? I want to hear from you, and I would love to actually interview you as well. So go ahead, head to my website, thefinancetherapist.com, use the contact form, and let's connect. And I want you to know that there's also free resources on my website, including a year-long program called Flex. So go ahead over to my website, The Finance Therapist Podcast. And also I have a new book out, Financial Therapy, Fairy Tales and Fables. And there's some activities in it, some short stories. And it's kind of a fun, cathartic way to look at managing your money and changing your money mindset. So on that, thank you so much. Please tune into the Finance Therapist Podcast, and I will talk to you soon about feelings and finance.